Yes, as Josh was saying, I am the executive director here at Summit Leadership Foundation. So first and foremost, I want to welcome you all. Uh-oh, I've got a time.
You're not mic'd yet.
Oh, no, I'm loud enough. Everybody's going to want to remember this anyway, so it's okay. So first of all, let me welcome you to Summit Leadership Foundation. We don't need that part on the recording anyway. We're going to do that in person. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for spending this beautiful snow day that we're going to have with us in the morning hours.
It's awkward for me to do this while you're telling me.
No worries. Perfect. All right. Thank you. So at Summit, we really exist to serve leaders in our community. That's our heart. That's our passion. And we do that around 4 C's of connecting, which, as Kurt shared first thing this morning, that's what we're doing today. Even so much as we're going to have lunch together this afternoon, and we hope you can hang around for that. And really just to do that, just to facilitate connections for those who you know, for those who you don't know, so that we can make some new friends and have new opportunities to engage one another outside of this event. And so connecting, consulting is a big part of what we do. We love to consult with leaders and businesses and nonprofits and ministries to help them achieve whatever their calling is and whatever they're trying to do in our community and around the world. Then we do coaching. We come alongside of leaders and we help them, do some strategic planning and maybe some best practices to say, okay, what if we choked up on the bat a little bit more on this next swing, or maybe we stood a little bit closer to the plate. Let's try again and see what type of results we would have with those types of input and inquiry into leaders. And then last thing we do is we care for leaders. We want to come alongside and put our arm around them and encourage them and tell them, you're doing a good work. Because leadership, how many people know leadership is hard in this room? Can you raise your hand? Leadership is hard, absolutely. It's tough, it's challenging. You have to wear a lot of different hats. And so we want to come alongside of you and encourage you and tell you what a great job you're doing and what you're doing is important, and connect you with those also who can do even more than us. We have Michelle King, who is a licensed, actually, counselor on staff with us, who is available for all of our partners to use as a resource. So for those times when you just need a little extra encouragement or a little extra tools in your toolbox to get through a tough situation, we want to connect with leaders and serve them in that capacity as well. So that's a little bit about Summit Leadership Foundation. And myself, as Josh mentioned, I've been with Summit now for about 2 years as the executive director. And before this, my background was all operations with organizations like Chick-fil-A and Target and Starbucks. And so coming into the nonprofit community has been an interesting transition. It's been fun, it's been challenging, but my heart really is serving leaders, and that's what I did with those organizations. I went to work for Starbucks, and I don't even drink coffee, but yet they hired me anyway because I promised I'd drink at least 1 cup a week, and they said, okay, we'll hire you if you promise that. But I didn't go there for the coffee, I went there for the people, and I went there for the way that they treated people and the way they valued people and the way that they created an experience around something that was basically a commodity before Starbucks came along. But they worked and they served and they loved on people and they created an environment around a commodity. Same thing, I went to work for Chick-fil-A. At that time, I wasn't eating a whole lot of meat in my diet, doing some vegetarian options and some different things and a little bit of meat here and there. And I told them that when I went in. I said, I don't eat a lot of chicken. And they said, well, that's okay. Can you eat at least like 1 sandwich a week? And I said, well, I can probably work that in. And they said, okay, well, you can come on board. But I went there again, same reason, because of the way that they serve people, and I wanted to be involved in that culture. And so I went around the country and I helped them open new stores in new markets like Utah and up in Chicago and in Virginia, and then also worked here as a home store to love on a team here and spend time with them and pour into leaders and young leaders in that environment to help them, if it was with Chick-fil-A, move forward in that career, but also give them life tools that they would be able to use wherever they go. So that's been about my corporate background, but I wanted to share with you today a phenomenal book, John Maxwell's latest book called Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn. Not lose. We can lose if we're not intentional about learning from that loss. But if we learn from it, then it's not truly a loss. And that's the net perspective that John's coming at when writing this book. But before we dive into that, I wanted to open up with a quick segment. We do a lot of leadership events here at Summit. We do some in-house, we do some externally. We've got a big one coming up on May the 9th. And May the 9th is what's called LeaderCast, and this is the largest one-day leadership conference in the world. It'll be broadcast all over the globe to over 140,000 leaders. And the gentleman who's emceeing that is a gentleman named Trip Crosby, and he's put together a video that I want to show you, a pretty humorous video. How many of you all participate in conference calls on any type of regular basis? How many of you enjoy participating in conference calls on any type of regular basis? Okay, well then you'll feel the pain of this video, and then we'll pick back up.
Trip Crosby, has joined the meeting.
Beth?
Has joined the meeting.
Hello?
Tyler?
No, this is Beth from ICS.
Oh, hey, Beth. How are you doing?
Oh, good. Yeah. Just making it,
Tyler?
Has joined the meeting.
All right, well, this is Trip. Who's here? Tyler's here.
Beth's here.
Okay, the purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the...
Yeah, I'll be able to do it in like 30 minutes. John?
Has joined the meeting.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I was just trying to go over the purpose of today's meeting, which is to discuss the Tyler?
Has joined the meeting.
Sorry, guys, I got cut off. This player? Send him invite.
Put in your access code.
No, that's your PIN number.
It should be a 9-digit number.
Try pressing the pound key. Paul.
Has joined the meeting.
Any questions before we move on?
Yes, this is Beth. What's our base plan of attack for the second quarter?
Question
We
actually...
should do. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I think
Well,
what we should do.
It
is
actually
really
depends on
diversify.
how you look at it, because the
really
really Go ahead.
Go ahead. I think
Given
what we-
sales,
what we
we're at...
really- I
let
think
me
what-
just say that... Okay.
It was a great graph, John. Tyler?
Well, my main concern with the projections for Gier was that they're just insufficient. I mean, they're
Did we lose Tyler again?
Hello?
John, are you guys taking distributions? John?
Oh, my bad. I was on mute. Let me start over.
So I've prepared a presentation. I'm sharing it with all of you. You should be able to see it on your screen right now.
Got it.
I don't see it. It says I need to download a plugin.
We are all using Macs, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I think this is great. Paul, do you have any comments on staffing?
I was
Rex, get down! To me, staffing is huge.
It's not me. I hit me.
I just want to go over a couple of details as we move into our next section here. We got 3 new departments coming on.
Breaking up a little bit, guys.
I'm
the
I
vet
think
spot.
everyone to give me detailed evaluations each
Sorry,
month,
guys.
so that we know. That's it, guys. Beth, you'll send out a recap email that could have basically taken the place of this whole meeting, correct?
Yep, always do.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, man. Dave, you been here the whole time? Yeah. Huh. Well, thanks everyone once again. Oh, one more. Hey, Trip here. I want to tell you real quick about an amazing event coming up this May that I'm hosting called LeaderCast Live. LeaderCast Live is a one-day leadership experience that's broadcast from Atlanta, Georgia to hundreds of locations around the world. We've got great speakers every year like Jack Welch, Henry Cloud, Malcolm Gladwell. I'll be there. So to find out more about attending the event or bringing it to your community or your organization, just go to leadercast.com.
So how many of us could relate? Judging by the laughs in the room, absolutely. That's a great video, but a great plug-in as well for LeaderCast. So it's something I wanted to put on your radar. Summit is organizing that event. You can purchase tickets through Summit or through the LeaderCast website. That'll be hosted at the Eastman Employee Center. We're going to have about 1,500 leaders from around the region there at the event. We did it there last year. Was a phenomenal success. Chick-fil-A is going to be catering lunch for us. We'll have Dunkin' Donuts in the morning with their, what do you call those little, they don't call them donut holes. Munchkins, there you go. Munchkins and coffee will be there in the morning to greet you, so be sure you get that on your radar. But let's jump into this book by John Maxwell, because how many of us have heard of the title before John modified it? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, right? It's just a saying in business or in life. Sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. But John's perspective on this was really to dive in a little bit deeper into that and say, okay, when we do have those losses in life, because can we all agree that it's not if, but when we're going to experience some type of loss or some type of failure? Okay, so we're all on the same playing field there. We don't win all the time, unfortunately. We wish we could. We'd love to. But if they're going to come, difficulties are going to come, setbacks are going to come. But his principle in this book is it's not a setback, it's not a true loss if we learn something. So John opens the book talking about one of his ultimate failures. And he talks about getting on the cover of Success magazine and looking sharp. You know, he's got his nice suit on, hair looks good, teeth are nice and bright. Great picture, great interview. About a week after this, or 2 weeks after this, he was flying private, coming back from Birmingham to his home in Florida, and a guest that was at the event that he was speaking at wanted to show his appreciation, and he gave John a brand new handgun as a gift and a thank you for speaking and doing such a great job. So John was very grateful, put the gun in the bag, didn't think much about it, flew private back to Florida. Didn't think about it again until he got in the line at the airport to fly commercial to Dallas the next week. Thought about it about the time that the bag hit the conveyor belt to go through the scanner. At that point, he blurts out, "Wait, there's a gun in the bag." You can imagine how well that went over with the TSA and everything else. So, you know, it wasn't as bad as it could have been because this was his home airport. The baggage handler knew him, the security people knew him. But the fact that he tried to carry a firearm potentially onto an airplane was an automatic arrest. So 2 weeks after this great picture, John had the privilege of having this great picture taken. And so, yeah, his mugshot. So what John has done so that he will never forget this lesson is in his briefcase, instead of a gun, he now carries a laminated card with this picture on one side, and when he flips it over, this is on the other side. And so he readily talks about that, and he thought about first thing is damage control. You know, how do I keep this contained? How do I not let this get out? You know, this was a boneheaded move. And he said, I realized really quickly that 9 out of the 10 people that were part of that process knew me. And he said there was no way I was going to contain it. So he said I started just sending it out. And so I tweeted and I sent out over, you know, social media what not to do when you come to an airport. Try to carry a gun through baggage claim. But he talked about that and shared that openly. But he learned from that as a byproduct. So his next book title that he was working on was Developing the Gangster Within You, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Airport Security, or Have Gun, Will Travel. So he's not written any of those yet, but he's developing those in the process. So why do losses hurt so much? This is the first chapter of the book. When we talk about losses in our life, and John says, number one, losses cause us to be emotionally stuck. The good times we tend to put in our pocket. We don't think a whole lot about those, the successes. But the bad times we put in our heart. And that's a quote by Les Brown. We talk about this in business in the way that when things are going well, we tend not to analyze those things too much. Because things are working, things are going smooth, there's not a lot of problems. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Absolutely. But I'll challenge you this. If you don't know why it's working when it's working, you won't know how to fix it when it's broken. But this is true, is it not? When we think about these things, we put the good times and the successes in our pockets, but we hold on to those failures in our heart. Number two, losses cause us to be mentally defeated, is John's input on this. And he says, distinguishing quality of a successful person is the capacity to manage disappointment and loss. Because we've already aligned around the fact that it's going to happen. We're going to have disappointments. We're going to have loss. We live in a fallen world, unfortunately. Those things are going to happen. But how do we manage those things will determine the distinguishing quality of if we're going to be ultimately successful or not. Why do losses hurt so much? William A. Ward says, man, like a bridge, was designed to carry the load for a moment, not the combined weight of a year all at once. And I think that's a great perspective. As we move through life and we face challenges and we face difficulties, if we don't deal with those things, if we don't process those correctly and we try to hold on to those and we put them in our heart, then they begin to accumulate, they begin to build up. And it's like this bridge example. It's not designed to carry all that weight at one time. It can't do it. It will fail. but it can carry a whole lot of weight if it continues to flow through as it's supposed to. Number 3, why do losses hurt so much? John says that losses create a gap between I should and I did. Make sense? Losses, especially when they pile up, can lead to insecurity, which cause us to doubt ourselves, and we begin to hesitate when making decisions. How many of us can say that's a bad thing? When you begin to hesitate when it's time to make the decision, not a good thing. You get into a pattern of what we would call ready, aim, 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 but you never what? Fire or execute. Absolutely. What does that lead to? Does that instill confidence in your leadership? Does that instill trust? Or does it breed frustration? Absolutely. Now, we don't want to go to the other extreme and go ready, fire, aim, because that's a bad sequence too, right? We can all agree with that. But if we get stuck in that aim process because we've held on to these disappointments and these losses and we begin to question ourselves, then we begin to lose credibility, we begin to lose focus, and we begin to lose momentum within our organizations. Traps that we often fall into, and I'll run through these really quickly, but we won't dive into them too much. But these are some common traps to be aware of when we're dealing with these things. The mistake trap, afraid of doing it wrong. The timing trap, well, it just isn't the right time. The rationalization trap, we try to rationalize it. Maybe it's really not that important anyway. The perfection trap, well, I have to find the best way to do it before I even start. Or the public opinion trap. If I fail, what will others think of me? If I try something and I don't succeed, how will that look in the marketplace? How will people view me in that case? And the self-image trap. If I fail at this, then it means I'm a failure. So, some traps to be aware of. The fourth thing John says, fourth reason that losses hurt so much, is that the first loss often isn't the biggest loss. Does that make sense? It says the most important person you will ever, number one, talk to is yourself, so be careful what you say. The most important person you will ever evaluate is yourself, so be careful what you think. And the most important person you will ever love is yourself, so be careful what you do. If we don't truly love ourselves, we'll have a hard time demonstrating and expressing love for others. So you have to realize that we're unique, we're created special, and we have opportunities to bless others in that way that we are adding value to, and we do love, and we do have opportunities. The fifth thing is that losses never leave us the same. Michael, when you said you lost $30 million in a day, when you woke up the next morning, were things a little bit different in your world?
Yeah, it was a week. It was very different.
A week, yeah, right. Things are never the same. Good, bad, and different. Win and forget it, lose and forget it. And I'll pause right there. How many of us have ever said, or have ever known, or even ourselves been in a position where we've lost or experienced failure, and we begin to get in a downward spiral, begin to, we don't need to go too far down the road. So we've held on to that too long, potentially. How many of us, have maybe ourselves, or known somebody that's held on to a win too long, and that's held them back in opportunities? Absolutely. If we're still telling stories from 1992, what have we done since 1992? It's either time to get some new stories or have some new opportunities. So we've got to think about that. If we want to overcome adversity and keep from being defeated by our losses, we have to get past them and learn from them. A loss isn't totally a loss if you learn something as a result of it. The loss gives us that opportunity, but many people don't seize it, and that's when losing hurts. If we don't seize that opportunity to learn from it, that's when it truly hurts. And that's the essence of chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, we begin to talk about, he defines each chapter in a single word. And chapter 2 for him is humility. And then he defines why humility is important in this process. Humility, John says, is the spirit of learning. When we talk about that, it says pride goes before a fall. And that's definitely scriptural based. And Michael tied in some good references there to our faith in this process. But those who profit from adversity possess a spirit of humility, and therefore are inclined to make the necessary changes needed to learn from their mistakes, failures, and losses. They stand in stark contrast to prideful people who are unwilling to allow adversity to be their teacher, and as a result, they fail to learn. Benton says pride is concerned about who's right, but humility is concerned about
what's right. I saw a great picture on Twitter yesterday from Andy Stanley. I think he sent it out from the Reagan Library, and it said, great things are possible if we don't care who gets the credit. But when we care too much about if I'm getting my piece of the pie or my credit, then it limits what we can do collectively, especially within an organization. But taking some of these principles, so humility, being able to say, I'm not good at everything. That's one of the things that we love to get leaders to the point of when we work with leaders within Summit and even outside of our doors. Getting the leaders to the point where they can realize that they're not good at everything is a remarkable point, because once I can say that I'm not good at everything, that I don't know it all, I'm not the smartest person in the room, it does two things. It frees you up to know what you are good at and recognize what your strengths and your abilities and your talents are and stay there, hopefully the majority of the time. But the second thing it does is it allows you to say what you're not good at, and it frees you up to know that and to admit that. But what that does is that allows you to bring other people alongside of you that can then offset those weaknesses or those opportunities. And when we're willing to do that, when we're able to open ourselves up in that humble way, then we can really truly begin to move forward as an individual with personal growth as well as organizational growth. So realizing and having that humility to be able to say that and know what you're good at. It's not bragging, especially if you can back it up where it's true, but it's not bragging when you know what your gifts and your abilities and your talents are, and you do whatever you can to spend as much time there that you can. You're going to be fulfilled. You're not going to be worn down. You're not going to be tired. You're going to actually be energized by that process, so you can work longer and harder and feel like you've done less when you're staying in that strength and that passion zone. So realizing what that is and allowing the others to come alongside of you and offset those weaknesses, because those are their gifts and their passion zones. So how much synergy and momentum and traction do you get when you do that? Way up here. Humility allows us to possess a true perspective of ourselves and life. We're living in reality. We're not seeing a false reality when we're living with humility. Humility enables us to learn and grow in the face of losses. It allows us to let go of perfection and to keep trying regardless. It allows us to make the most of our mistakes. Some questions to ask yourselves in this chapter he asks you. He says, think of someone whom you would describe as confident yet humble. And what about them, whether it be their actions, their words, their demeanor, conveys humility? So think about someone in your life. Just take a minute here. We'll just think about this briefly, and you can make a note if you want to. But who do you know in your life that displays those characteristics? That's confident yet humble or has humility. Number two, he says, people who do excellent work typically hold themselves to an extremely high standard of performance. Yet when we judge ourselves by the unrealistic standard of perfection, we constantly will feel inadequate. How can we manage high self-expectations while also accepting our imperfections? How can we do that? So just some thoughts about humility and transitioning a loss into a learning experience. Chapter 3 he titles Reality. And reality he defines as the foundation of learning. If you're not living in reality, you're not building that foundation. Whatever you put on top of that foundation, there's no substance there. So we've got to live in reality. So he talks about avoiding reality temporarily shields us from discomfort, but the attempt to escape our problem never fully succeeds. It only delays and also magnifies the pain. We cannot generate positive change in our life if we are in denial about our circumstances, plain and simple. But to improve our situation, we must honestly confront all the facts of life, even the unpleasant ones. If we're not willing to deal with that, we'll never move forward. We'll never be able to transition from a loss. So 3 realities. Number 1, life is difficult. Amen? Okay? Once we accept that life is hard, we begin to grow and every problem becomes an opportunity. Number 2, life is difficult for everyone, not just for a few. It is difficult for everyone. We learn to face difficulty, accept it, and move ahead. That's our goal. But number 3, he makes a point that says life is more difficult for some than others. And this is where he talks about comparison. I love the depth that he goes into in this, and I would challenge you to read this. But comparison is a trap, and it's not productive. There is no win in comparison. Because what we do in comparison is we either see ourselves falsely inflated and we begin to become arrogant, or we see ourselves as inferior and we begin to doubt our abilities and our strengths and our passions. There is no win in comparison. You are unique. You are created unique. You are created with special abilities, talents, and gifts. and there's nobody else like you in the world. If you want to be somebody else, well, then we've just lost who you are. And we can't afford that because you're unique and there's nobody else like you on this planet. So don't fall into the trap of comparison. Don't make life harder for yourself. Number one, life is more difficult for those who stop growing and learning. Success can distort our view of reality. We touched on that briefly. We know those who have held on to success too long and never move past that or move forward beyond that to experience more success. They live in the past and those future wins, or those past wins and those past successes. Life is more difficult for those who don't think effectively. Good thinkers don't always succeed, but they don't keep making the same mistakes repeatedly. Who knows Einstein's definition of insanity? But anticipating different results. Absolutely. Doing what we've always done, but expecting different results. If we want different results, we've got to change something. So he's saying here, good thinkers don't always succeed, but they don't keep making those same mistakes over and over again. Number three, life is more difficult for those who don't face reality because most people spend their entire lives living on a fantasy island called Someday I'll. And here he calls it I''LL instead of ISLE, but Someday I'll. We spend time there. We can't. We don't want to do that. That's one of the things we love to work with leaders on and get people that have common passions together at a table, because the conversation shifts quickly when you do that to, well, maybe someday we should or someday I'll, to what can we do today? You get momentum, you get traction, you get synergy when you begin to do that together. Life is more difficult for those who are slow to make proper adjustments. I think that's just pretty obvious. It's also difficult for those who don't respond correctly to challenges. We have to accept reality, and we have to act accordingly. If we're not living in reality, then we're never going to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So here's some questions for you from this one. What causes leaders to be inattentive to uncomfortable realities? Why would we do that? Why would we want to ignore things that are uncomfortable and cause us to live in reality and put blinders on and only choose to see those other things within our scope of vision? Why would we do that? So once we identify that, then what systems or processes can you put in place to encourage your team or even maybe yourself to confront those hard facts? There's a great book called Crucial Conversations that I'll encourage you to pick up. If you've not read that or heard of that, it's a really good book. I'll think of the gentleman's name in a minute, but Crucial Conversations. Great read. Number two, what do you consider to be the most difficult circumstances that you've had to overcome in your professional career to date? So you think back over the span of your career, what have been some of those difficult obstacles and hurdles that you've had to overcome, and what motivated you to deal with that difficulty rather than to flee from it? So don't stuff those successes in your pocket, because those are successes, and forget about them. Pull them out, relearn from them, look back over those old notes, look back over those old portfolios and figure out, okay, this was a really difficult time in my career, but I chose to deal with that difficulty and I moved forward beyond it. How did I do that? And what motivated me to do that? As you assess your present situation at work, what challenging situations have you been hoping to avoid that, if you're perfectly honest with yourself, deserve more urgent attention? Fair question. What's going on right now in my current reality that I'm consciously choosing to put blinders on and ignore? Maybe it's a difficult team member. Maybe it's a difficult boss. What am I consciously choosing not to deal with and pretend that, oh, I don't see, the big elephant over there in the room. I'm going to look over here and just see the peanuts. So chapter 4, reality living is the foundation of learning. Responsibility, When you fail to take responsibility, you cede control of your life. We neglect responsibility by assigning blame or by insisting that a problem doesn't fall within our job description. When we choose to adopt the mindset of a victim or bystander, then we put our lives at the mercy of other people or the whims of fate. In contrast, willingness to assume responsibility empowers us to focus on the positive contribution that we can make instead of on the negative circumstances that we cannot change. So taking responsibility for ourselves, for our actions, for our teams. He says if we ignore responsibility long enough, a pattern will begin to emerge in our lives. That pattern is we develop a victim mentality. Counselors talk about this a lot, the victim mentality. We see it, unfortunately, in our society more than I care to think about. But we have an unrealistic view of how life truly works. We don't see reality. We constantly engage in what John calls blame storming. Not brainstorming solutions, but blame storming others for the situation or the predicament we found ourselves in. We give away the choice to control our lives. If we do this, we're handing that off to someone else. We're not taking our own life in our hands. We eliminate any possibility for growth or success. It can't happen. Growth can't happen in this environment. Not going to happen. It's impossible. It's like trying to grow a plant with no dirt, no water, and no sunlight. Not going to happen. It is impossible. So we've got to realize that if we ignore responsibility long enough, these things will begin to manifest themselves in our lives. So we need to be aware of that. If we learn to be responsible, the flip side of that coin is then we begin to take our first steps in learning. We want to grow. We want to learn. We want to come to events like this where we hear other perspectives and we have value added and poured into our lives. Then we see things in their proper perspective. Things are in alignment. We're living in reality. We stop repeating our failures. We grow stronger and we back up our words with behavior. We don't tell somebody we're going to do something and we don't. We don't overpromise and underdeliver, as Kurt said earlier. I love this quote by Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you, but we've already heard this, but what you can do for your country. In that same spirit, rather than asking teammates to do something for you, consider what you can do as a leader to inspire, encourage, or add value to them. List a couple of specific ways that you could act on their behalf during the upcoming week. We talk about this with leaders and realizing that, if I'm the CEO of the organization, if I'm serving everyone in the organization, does that mean I need to be down in the mailroom stuffing envelopes? No, it doesn't. What it does mean is I have more resources at my disposal to make that person that is stuffing envelopes in the mailroom successful than anybody else in the organization. That's where my accountability lies. Not that I need to be stuffing envelopes. Yes, sir.
Going back to your humility teaching, there's a fine mix with that CEO, with the humility, and with the leadership.
Yes.
And being willing to pick up the parking lot or to help in a registration line or do whatever endears you to your organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll share that from a Starbucks perspective. Had an opportunity to go in early in my career there with a high-level executive who had been with the company since he had played volleyball in Howard Schultz's backyard. That's how long he had been with the organization. And we walked into a store, high-volume store. They were understaffed. Line was out the door. The gentleman walks in, walked up to the store manager, greeted him, shook his hand, and asked for an apron. Put on the apron, got behind the counter. I didn't know what I was doing, or I would have jumped back there myself. He said, just go and help someone any way you can. If they want to talk about a coffee maker, my knowledge was limited, but I just went out and served those who were in the cafe. Cleaned up tables, bus tables. We did that for about an hour and a half through that morning rush, and then about 10 o'clock that line began to die down. He took off the apron, then we originally had the meeting that we were scheduled to have there. But that type of leadership is what we're talking about here, is that servant leadership, that servant heart, humility-based leadership, absolutely. And it does endear, it does make a difference, because that's not the norm. That's not what that store manager really expected, or he may have because he had the relationship with this leader, but it was in stark contrast to me being from the outside in of something that I had never seen before. Similar leadership in Chick-fil-A. I'll put Chick-fil-A's executive leadership team against any Fortune 500 company in the United States because they get it. They know what leadership is about. They serve to the degree that it will blow your mind how much they enjoy serving those within their organization. Even Dan Cathy, when he comes into a restaurant at a grand opening, Truett's son, Truett's the founder of Chick-fil-A, and Dan Cathy's now the operations manager or COO of the organization. When he comes into a restaurant, he doesn't come in and walk through and just glad hand and then out he goes. To the degree that a new operator, which is a new restaurant owner, new to the organization, wanted to impress Dan and welcome Dan in a grand way when he was coming to his grand opening, so he sent a limousine to go and pick Dan up at the airport because he just wanted to honor him and welcome him. The only way that Dan would ride in that limo back to the store is if he could ride in the passenger seat and not in the back of that limousine, because he did not want to be seen pulling up into the front of that store and getting out of the back of a limousine because that's not who he was. He's a servant. He doesn't want to be served. And so he did. He rode shotgun with the driver of that. And he wanted to drive, but the guy wouldn't let him drive. But he at least let him put the hat on. So when Dan got out of the passenger side, he had the little driver's hat on. And I think I probably still have a picture of it somewhere, just because that's the type of leader that he is, and that's endearing. And you build morale, you build engagement, you build retention when you develop leadership like that. So this is a great point here. As we move forward, chapter 5, we talk about improvement, and John defines improvement as the focus of learning. The focus of learning. So he says, improving the quality of our life does not involve changing jobs or switching addresses so much as investing in our own development. As Michael mentioned, personal development. Prioritizing professional success gives rise to the false hope of catching a big break, but usually ends in frustration. On the other hand, prioritizing personal growth gives rise to competency and steady upward progress. More than anything else, the capacity for self-development distinguishes a person and makes him or her stand out from the crowd. I'll go into a little bit of depth here. I want to honor your time. Improving yourself is the first step to improving everything else. It's foundational. Improvement requires us to move out of our comfort zones. It is not satisfied with quick fixes, but it is a daily commitment. We've talked about that earlier, another talk. How do you define success? It's a big question. If I ask you one-on-one, if we were sitting across the table at each other with Chick-fil-A or at Starbucks, and I ask you, what's your definition of success? What would that be? This is a challenge question. If you don't have a personal definition of success, why not? If you don't define success for yourself, someone else or culture will. And I can almost guarantee that you won't like it at the end where you wind up. Goes back to that responsibility piece that John talked about earlier. What is your personal definition of success? If you don't have one, maybe that's your takeaway for today in my talk, and that's been a blessing for me if it is. Improvement happens incrementally. What daily habits are helping you grow as a leader? In light of your future goals, what new habits should you consider adding to your daily routine? I would also challenge you, most of us have a to-do. How many of you have a to-do list? Right? How many of you have a stop doing list? Right? Right? Yeah, absolutely. I would challenge you to have a stop doing list. Not only what am I going to do, but what am I not going to do anymore? What am I not going to empower people with when they have the ability to do it themselves because I want to do it or I want to hold on to it too long? Am I robbing my team or my organization from moving forward and from achieving new growth and new opportunities because I want to hold on to things too long and too tightly to open it up and allow others to do and grow and learn? Maybe they're not going to do it perfectly. Maybe they're not going to achieve success right off the bat, but that's okay. We've created an environment that's safe for them to do that, and they're not going to sink the ship, but we are going to learn and we are going to have new takeaways and new growth. Chapter 6 is entitled Hope. And John defines hope as the motivation of learning. This is a big chapter. You know, we heard a lot about hope a few years ago in a certain election, but John talks about that briefly in here. But hope is huge. If we lose hope, in John's word, we lose it all. Losses in life are never fun, but there is one loss that no one can afford to experience, and that's the loss of hope. Hope generates resiliency, gives us the energy to get back up after having been knocked down. A hopeful mindset faces forward, allowing us to forget past mistakes and look ahead to a better future. When we have hope, our present troubles are lighter to bear and quicker to pass. If you've ever been in a place where you have no hope, you know that you never want to be there again. It's a dark place, it's a depressing place, it's a frustrating place. Not a lot of personal growth happening when there's no hope. So what do we do when we have hope? Hope says yes to life, it fills us with energy. As John said, it focuses forward and it's a difference maker. So how do we cultivate hope? How do we grow hope even with ourselves, with our organization? A couple of things. We have to realize that hope is a choice, as opposed to optimism. He clarifies that here. Optimism is a passive virtue, if someone's just optimistic. But hope is an active virtue. Number 2, he says, change your thinking. It's simple, but it's not easy. We have to change our thinking about hope. and where our hope comes from and what hope is. And number 3, he says, win small victories. Maybe we don't celebrate a first down like we do a touchdown, but we still celebrate that first down. You know? If we're rooting on our favorite football team and they're on the march down the field and there's 2 minutes left in the game, we might celebrate a first down as much as we did a touchdown in the first quarter of the game, because that's a big milestone. So depending on where we are, we need to celebrate those small wins, begin to build momentum, which will foster hope within our organization. People with a sense of victory down the left side, and then people with a sense of defeat down the right side. When we sense victory, then we sacrifice things to succeed. When we sense defeat, we don't want to give anything. We give as little as possible. When we sense victory, we look for ways to win. But when we sense defeat, we look for excuses on why we're not going to win. When we're sensing victory, we become energized. When we're sensing defeat, not so much. We become tired and complacent. We want to follow the game plan when we sense victory. The game plan's working. What we're doing is the right path. We've charted the right course, and we want to stay that course when we sense victory is imminent. But when we sense it's not coming, or it's not as easy as we wanted it to be, maybe we want to forsake the game plan. Maybe we want to say, well, maybe that wasn't the right call, just arbitrarily. But that's when we're sensing defeat. We also want to help team members. When we live in an environment, when we're in an environment of victory and we're sensing that, we want to bring others along. We want to achieve victory together. We want to achieve success together. But when we're sensing defeat, we begin to look for what's in it for me. We don't want to bring other people along. We want to get ours while we can and forget about, Joe and Mary and Sally in that process. It's all about me. And so we hurt others to get ahead in that environment. So we want to look at these things when we have a sense of victory and a sense of defeat. The effects of pep talks and motivational speeches tend to wear off quickly. And as Zig Ziglar says, somebody asked Zig, why do you do so many motivational speeches and why do you do all this stuff? And he said, well, it's kind of like a shower. If you don't do it daily, it tends to stink after a while. So we do that. In what ways can leaders inspire the type of hope that motivates team for the long term? How can we engage our team and even do some self-motivation to engage ourselves around the long term and not just a short-term pep talk? Pep talks are important. How many of you know about Kid President? You all familiar with Kid President? If you're not, jot that down and look it up on YouTube when you get a chance. Kid President, a little African-American guy about this tall, is facing a pretty debilitating disease, but you never know it. And he's called Kid President, dresses up in a little suit, red tie, got his presidential desk, his hand-drawn cartoon flag and presidential seal behind him, and man, he'll inspire you probably more than anybody you've seen in the last 10 years. So jot that down. That's a good takeaway. What are the enemies that threaten to extinguish hope? Identify those. They may be different for all of us, but what in our lives are the enemies that threaten to extinguish hope in our lives? Let's identify them. Let's have some SWOT analysis. We need to identify those threats in our lives that are coming against our hope. So chapter 7, I'll leave you with teachability because I need to wrap up here. I want to honor the time for the speakers that are left. There are 13 chapters in this book, so we've made it about halfway through. But if you'd like to know more, we're going to be doing a Growing Leaders workshop that will cover the last half of this book next month. There's a card on the front desk that tells you the dates of those upcoming Growing Leaders events. That's something we do for the partners of Summit for free. But you're also able to come in as a non-partner for a nominal cost, and we'd love to share the rest of that with you. I think we have some copies of this book available too if anyone's interested. We may be able to drum up a few of those for sale. But in the last minute here, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share that with you. Thank you for allowing me to add value, hopefully, to your lives. Maybe there have been some good takeaways. If there's anything that Summit can do for you all as a leader in our community, we'd be happy to speak with you about that. We are a nonprofit in the community, so we don't receive any government funding or grants or anything like that. We are fully funded by the donations of individuals and businesses within our community. And so we're thankful to have a facility like this to host these meetings in, and thankful for partners like a lot of you in the room who do help partner with Summit and help move us forward in the community and in the world. We really have a vision to become relational hubs all around the world for connecting, consulting, coaching, and caring to move leaders forward in their mission. So thank you for the time.
Anybody can read a book, but you did an outstanding job of educating us on this.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for the feedback, and thank you all. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll enjoy seeing you at lunch. Thank you.